The Congressional Budget Office, I've got to think of some sort of acronym that instead of Congressional Budget Office, it's the Congressional Bozos of something. They've just decided that the next recession we're going to have is going to be in the year 2029, that we are not going to have a recession for more than 10 more years. This is pretty much an impossibility. If you've been through a recession before, you know that there's another recession right around the corner. Everybody knows that, except for Congress. They've taken the current good times and projected them out another 10.5 years so that they can go and pass it, because they get elected by promising us free stuff. I've never seen anybody else write or talk about something I call the financialization of government. And the reason I call it the dangerous fog, this is another thing that makes it hard to see what's going on. In California, I'm from California, and we had something called the Central Valley there. It's a 500-mile long valley that's between the Coast Ranges and the Sierra Nevadas, and there's these dense fogs that accumulate in that valley. And some of these fogs, it's not safe to drive over 5, 10, 15 miles an hour. And what will happen is people become bored. I mean, you've got to drive hours and hours and hours to go from LA to San Francisco or LA to Sacramento. And the valley almost goes from LA to Oregon, almost. And I've been in these fogs before, driving 15 miles an hour, and then a car passes me at 80. Just driving, I mean, way over anything that's safe. There's no possibility if there was something there that he could stop. He's just hoping that the other car in front of him is also going 80. But anyway, one car will plow into another and there's an accident. And then another car hits it and another car, and some of these pileups are more than 100 cars. And then a big tractor-trailer rig comes out of the fog and piles into everybody just when everybody thinks it's over with. This is the two-stage crash. The tractor-trailer rig is the bonds that I was talking about, the currency crisis, bond crisis. And part of the cause is the financialization of government. And this, again, is stock market capitalization. But I've put it on a different scale here. This isn't on the stock market capitalization scale. This is on the scale that matches the base currency, the amount of dollars that the Federal Reserve creates. And the reason I put it on here is I wanted to show you the correlation, the match of base currency creation and the stock market capitalization. There is 6 years ago, 6 years of information here from 2009 to the end of 2014, that the stock market and the creation of currency almost matched each other exactly. And so, to me, I don't think that there's any chance, there's no chance in hell that this is an accident. This can't be a coincidence. The creation of currency is what lifted the stock market. Now I'm going to show you tax revenues to the U.S. So this is federal tax revenues, and they've become reliant on the stock market doing well. Back before the year 2000, there wasn't any correlation between the stock market and the U.S. and the federal tax revenues. But after the year 2000, there's a very high correlation. And one thing I want to point out here is that QE1 and QE2 did trickle from Wall Street down to Main Street, but QE3 was nothing but a gift to the richest people on the planet. They created all that currency, and all of it went into the big, it pumped up the big brokerage houses and the financial firms. Now, I put GDP in here. This is getting to be a complex chart to read because there's too many lines on it. I'll take one of them out in a minute. But I just put this on here because I wanted to show you this wrinkle here. This is the first significant contraction in GDP since the Great Depression. So the only stock market crash that you can point to, looking back, that caused a significant wrinkle in GDP was the stock market crash of 1929. Now this is interest rates, and I put that on here because there's this huge gap in here where there's nothing. And that's where there should be free market interest rates, and that's where there should be the currency supply. This gap, pushing the currency supply up here, taking interest rates down to zero, that made all of the homes more affordable and pushed real estate back into a bubble, all the currency creation, And the low interest rates encourage margin debt, so that's the reason we've seen margin debt go to these astronomical levels. And the currency creation lifted the stock market. So I want to now point out this little tiny wrinkle back in 1987 here, because this is what's called a linear chart. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A logarithmic chart, instead of the numbers going up linear, it's the percent change stays linear. So if it rises 10%, the next step is 10% of whatever the total was. So in other words, it would go 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So I'm going to take this same information. In a while, I'll show it to you that way. But I'm going to zoom in first on that stock market crash, and that little wrinkle was actually pretty darn big. We'll put a link underneath this video so that you can listen. A friend of mine, Grant Williams, did a phenomenal presentation on the 1987 stock market crash. People thought the world was coming to an end. There was a single day here where the stock markets in the United States lost 26% of their value. Peak to trough is 33%. Yet, the Federal Reserve didn't have to rush in with any currency creation. The GDP did not change whatsoever. And the tax revenues, they contracted, but so little it's not worth mentioning. 1.4% is basically like a rounding error when you're talking about federal tax revenues. And the time it took to get to brand new highs in tax revenues was just 9 months, because they do the reporting quarterly. So it was actually less than 9 months. Contrast that with the crashes that we've had this century, and the tax revenues after the dot-com bubble popped. The tax revenues fell by almost 20%. And then in the global financial crisis, and it took 4 years and 3 months, 4.25 years, to get back to break even, versus 9 months for the '87 stock market crash. Yeah, this is very significant. Then the crisis of the global financial crisis, you're talking 28%. So we're talking about almost a third contraction here, of more than a quarter, less than a third, of tax revenues, and 5.25 years to get back to break even. Now the problem here is politicians in good times always project them infinitely out into the future. I'm going to show you this in a moment. And they base all of their spending on that. And when they pass a budget, it's always passed with a deficit built into it. They always plan on spending more than their income. This is just something they do year after year after year, counting on inflation to sort of make up the difference, and there will be enough tax revenues next year or the year after. But when you have something like this was what was responsible for the $1 trillion plus budget deficits that we saw after the global financial crisis. So this next chart is the duration of economic expansions, which simply means the length of time between recessions. You have a recession, which is a contraction, then you've got an expansion. So this is the data. There are 33 of them in here. These are the 33 previous economic expansions that we've had in U.S. history going all the way back to 1854. So 3 of these happened before Lincoln was assassinated. The average here is 4.5 years. So usually there's a recession every the expansion goes 4.5 years, there's a recession. Then you come out of the recession, that expansion goes 4.5 years, there's a recession. We're currently in the second longest economic expansion in history. So this is already very, very old and should be coming to an end soon. But the Congressional Budget Office, I've got to think of some sort of acronym that instead of Congressional Budget Office, it's the Congressional Bozos of something. They've just decided that the next recession we're going to have is going to be in the year 2029, that we are not going to have a recession for more than 10 more years. This is pretty much an impossibility. If you've been through a recession before, you know that there's another recession right around the corner. Everybody knows that, except for Congress. They've taken the current good times and projected them out another 10.5 years so that they can go and pass it, because they get elected by promising us free stuff. That's how they get elected. Elect me, and I'm going to do this for you. Well, they're projecting this so that they can pass budgets that promise you a whole bunch of free stuff. Now, that causes the debt to rise. First, I'm going to show you I've uncovered recently, I was at a conference at a recent Silver Summit in San Francisco, and I was on stage with Jeff Christian of CPM Group, and I have a